This is the first book that I chose for our presentation. It kind of deals with the issue of family diversity. It's called Mom's School, and it's kind of a picture of what a good role model for a mom would be, in my opinion. And so I think it's important to include, but this is not accurate for all students. This page just shows some examples of what I think a good mom would do, and they're things that my mom did for me when I was a child. But not all moms do this, and so I think it would be a good activity for students to come up with what they think their mom learned at Mom's School that they're really good at, or someone else that represents a mom role model for them, just to find the value and having that important person in their life. The next book that I chose is also about family diversity, kind of, and like family traditions. It's called Christmas in the Country. And so, kind of stood out to me because growing up in the country, I know that things are a little different than they necessarily would be in the city, and that there's just some additional opportunities that come with that. And so this also stood out to me because the little girl lives with her grandparents, and that's something that not all students can understand because they don't live with their grandparents. They just go and visit them at Christmas time. And so just like pointing out that that is okay, and that's something that some children do. And this picture was just one of the few that stood out. They have a real Christmas tree, which is something different than what I've always had growing up. But then I also could connect to it because I do have older parents who like to take their naps. So it's just letting each child know that their family traditions are just as important, even if they don't necessarily celebrate Christmas, finding the things that they do celebrate and letting the class share those with them. The next book was called Around the World Right Now, and it deals with diversity and different people. And so it goes through the different time zones of the world, and it's kind of hard to understand at first, but they're all happening at the same time. So it's 6 o'clock at the beginning in California, but yet it's 8 o'clock at this part of the book, although it's the same time around the world. And so this just is a picture that shows different people that look different than what we necessarily do, and they're doing different activities, but they kind of correspond with things that we're doing here in our normal life, and it's happening the exact same time as us. So I think it's just a good way to show them that even though we're all different, we're still part of the same world, and we're still living the same life at the same time. Next, kind of moves on to the issue of poverty in the next couple books. And so this was a book that I actually had myself, and I thought it was really cool. It's called The Lucky Star. It takes place in the Depression era. It's about a young girl who really excels in her class at school, but due to the Depression, she is unable to attend school because of the lack of resources. She is worried about her younger sister getting an education, so she decides she's going to teach the younger kids in the community using the little resources that they have by using the leftover flour. And so she teaches them how to read, spell words, do math, and her mom just reminds her throughout the book to count her lucky stars. And so she starts to realize that even though she has very few things still left in her life, that they're really important things, and it makes life worth living. So it stood out to me as being a future teacher. I think it's really cool that this young girl has that passion at an early age, and so I would like to share that issue of poverty with my students. This next book is also about poverty, but it also kind of includes the idea of homelessness. It also takes place in the Depression era, but it's from a boy's perspective. Due to the lack of work that was available at the time, he decides to travel out west to search for a job in order to help his family. And in order to get west, he decides to ride the railroad cars. So it just kind of, this was a picture that shows how hard life would have been for him during that time. It's something that not all students even understand as a possibility to travel and live that kind of lifestyle. And it's a brutal thing, but it's kind of interesting to realize that this is how some people live. So I would just include that. And at the end, he decides that throughout all of his travels, the best place for him to be is at home, helping his family out by being there with them. Next, we have Joseph Had a Little Overcoat, which is a more simpler story of kind of the same concept of not poverty, but not always having the best resources. And so it starts out and he has an overcoat that he really loves, you can tell. And so as it gets worn, he just makes it into something new. So it becomes a jacket, and then it turns into a vest, and it keeps going until at the end, all he has left to make is a button. So once he loses the button, he has nothing left. And so he decides to make a book out of it, and it proves that you can always make something out of nothing. And so I think this is important to show students, because not all students have the resources to always go out and buy new clothes when theirs are getting kind of raggedy. They have to make something new out of it, or they have to use family hand-me-downs, and they could feel ashamed about that. So this is just something to make them feel like it's okay and that they're just using what they have and being resourceful. The next book deals with children with disability, and this was a really interesting book that I learned a lot from, and I think it would give students a lot better appreciation of young blind children that have to use Braille. And so this is the story of the inventor of Braille, as it talks about how he became blind, and then he ended up going to a school in order to learn how to read, but he just wasn't happy with the way that the books work, because he wasn't getting much from it. So through a secret code that the military used, he was able to create his own invention that shows different letters of the alphabet, and so he was able to read. And this was my favorite page, because it showed that even though it was hard, he never gave up. He just kept on trying until he was able to accomplish what he wanted. And even though he was someone blind who he could have just gave up and been sorry for himself and not even tried, he made a difference in his life and found his own solution to make his problem better. The next book has to deal with accepting those who are different than you, and it takes place during the Pearl Harbor time, and a young girl that is really curious about what's going on and doesn't necessarily understand it. So she is on the lookout for Japanese spies all around her, and she ends up seeing a young boy that lives next door that is Japanese. And so through the time they become friends, and they learn how to trust each other, and they kind of join forces together. There's a lot of things that go on with their families that they have to overcome, and at the end he does end up getting taken away and put with the rest of the Japanese, and so that's kind of hard for her to let go. But I think it's important to show students that even though there may be someone that they don't have a lot in common with, or they don't feel like they can be friends with, that anyone can overcome those differences, even these two that had everything put against them. And it was even dangerous to be friends with those kind of people, that they learned how to trust and get along. The last two books deal with community issues and becoming kind of a village, like this one says, it takes a village. So it is a book that shows different community members coming together for a single goal. They use kindness, sharing, hard work, and eventually they build something great that is for the community, that is for all the children. And it just is a simple way to teach younger students about being good citizens, being good community members, working together. And lastly, this is a book that is also good for younger students. It's called Whose Hands Are These? It's kind of a guessing book, and so each page has a word that rhymes that leads them to what career it is talking about. And so it's a great way to introduce different careers that people in the community would have and talk about the value of those. And so this was my favorite page because it talks about a teacher, and so I definitely think that's an important career. But I think this would be a great way to work up to a family career day or community field trip, and just letting students know that they can do any career they want, that there's nothing standing in their way as long as they work hard enough to get there, and that no one career is more important than the other, that they all have value in the community. So these are just a few of the children's books that I know would be a great way to incorporate a lot of hard issues into your classroom and kind of introduce that topic, but these are the ones that stood out to me.